Okay, we've done the disparagement of the people, the various people we work with. It's time to record the podcast. Ellie, can I have that coffee back? Sorry.
Editorial assistant. Indeed.
This is not in your job description.
You can make anything seem bad by pointing out what's actually happening. Hello and welcome back to the Cineskinny. It's the film podcast from the team behind the Skinny magazine. Jamie Dunn is not here this week. He's in Glasgow doing some other film related stuff.
Boo.
Well, we can boo him all we like because he's not here. He's not here to defend himself, and he doesn't even have to be edited out. Like, this is the thing. Normally, if we were to have a go at him, we could just edit it out, but now we don't even have to.
No, we can do whatever we like.
I'm joined by the voice you hear razzing up Jamie, Anahit Burrows, and Ellie Robertson. Do you got anything to say about our friend and colleague Jamie Dunn?
I have nothing but respect for Jamie Dunn.
Nice.
I think the way you treat him is disgusting.
Sorry, Anahit, we can edit that out. So yes, we're back at Ground Floor, the EHFM studio on Junction Street to talk about the movies, two movies to talk about in particular this week, with a general theme of kind of like dystopian, sci-fi-ish, futuristic-ish vibes. New Bong Joon-Ho, Mickey 17, and Best Animated Film at this year's Oscars Academy Awards, Flow. Apparently, fun fact, we'll get the fun fact out of the way first, highest grossing Latvian film of all time.
Yay.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Yeah, so big up.
That's
Latvia.
great.
Big up Latvia. Shout out to my friends in Latvia. So yeah, we'll talk about those two films. We'll talk generally about kind of dystopian things. Everyone else around the table has readily admitted to not having prepared very much. So it's all right. I've got 3 questions to ask them. We can turn that into 10 minutes of audio.
Oh, huge. Good for you.
So that we're enter the banter zone. Everyone have a lovely time. But before we get straight into the definitely prepared and 100% structured portion of the show, Anahit, what have you been watching that you could talk about for 2-3 minutes?
Excuse me. I have mostly, I'll be so real with you, been watching Love is Blind.
Nice. Can I be real with you and ask you to talk about Love is Blind slightly more into your microphone?
Yeah, if you insist. Hang on. I'm like hinging forward at the hip, which is what... Oh, no, there we go. Is that better?
That is better.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, I've been watching Love is Blind, which I started doing with my... So I don't watch reality TV ever. So this is my first like real foray into reality TV since the days of America's Next Top Model, which was fucking great. I watched Queer Eye. Does that count? I feel it's not like malicious, that show. And I think of reality TV as very malicious. Anyway, so I watched...
I think the thing about Queer Eye is it's non-competitive.
Yes, exactly. Which is crucial. And it's very like, politics is nice. Like, be kind, smiley face, live, love, which is insidious in itself.
Yeah, be kind. Did you know that you can smack a cucumber in a number of different ways? Also, one of our colleagues has rebuilt your entire house.
Exactly.
So that's non-competitive reality TV. Then competition reality TV is like, we've all made cakes, but one of us has to leave. And then Love is Blind probably falls in competitive reality TV.
Does
where you're
it,
not,
though?
I don't know if you're trying to win, but you are trying to prove a point to the other person. But I'll let you continue.
Isn't all marriage competition at the end of the day? I really think it is. Yeah, it's been really fascinating watching it. The thing I actually find the most fascinating, so I watched the latest season 8. I watched season 6 because apparently it was very dramatic, and it was. And now I'm halfway through season 1. And the thing that I find very interesting is they do this like big reunion towards the end. And the way that the hosts talk about it, there'll always be like someone who, I don't know, like lied a little bit, or, you know, actually wasn't really that into it, or wasn't like serious about like marriage in the end. And the hosts are really like, you know, there's always people that come on here just because they want to be on TV. But we know that most of you are here for the right reasons. And I'm like, bitch, you're on TV. Like, what are you talking about? The way that they like go for people that they're like, you are not taking this seriously. And then they've just created this scenario where everything is televised. People can become famous from it. No one is allowed to have a real relationship because they're like stoking up drama between each other. The point of this, the reason it sells is that there is drama and people aren't authentic. And then on live television, they get angry at them for not being authentic. for doing the thing that is helping them sell their TV show. Do you know what I mean? It makes me feel insane.
You don't go to the bear fights and complain that there's fur everywhere.
Exactly.
Especially when you are the P.T. Barnum who organised the bear.
Exactly. I'd be like, I'm sorry, you got it everywhere. Bitch, then don't let the bears out. Anyway, so that's my opinion on Love is Blind. I also watched the one film that I've seen was Picture This, which is like the new, I think, like Amazon movie with the girlie from Bridgerton season 2. It was so awful.
Is this one of the movies that Amazon make where they advertise it on the side of buses and they use my favourite caption, which is new movie?
Yeah, I think so. yeah. Because that's all there is to say about it.
This is one of those new movies.
It's a new movie. I'm pretty sure it was written by AI. Like, it cannot be. A real person did not write those words down. It's fucking crazy. Yeah, very, very weird. I mean, I was very stoned when I watched it. But I do maintain it was really, really, like, the way that people would talk, the things they would say, the, like, real, like, weird non sequiturs. The girlie from Bridgerton, what is her name? Simone Ashley really looked like there was a gun held to her head the whole way through. Like, was so phoned in. It was, I think, maybe the worst of these, like, studio rom-coms that I've seen in a very long time. And I did have a great time. So that's what I've been watching.
I mean, I'm a fan of a bad film. Parentheses, good.
Yes.
So I appreciate this. I think
you might like it.
I think we like slightly different bad films good. But and I feel like we probably also like bad film good in quite a gendered way.
Yes, probably.
In that I want my bad film good to have like really poorly choreographed fight scenes.
Yeah, or Lindsay Lohan.
Yes. But Lindsay Lohan transcends the bounds of gender.
That is true.
It's true. Lindsay Lohan exists for all days of the calendar, as long as those days are loosely tied to some kind of like Western celebration.
Oh my God, did you watch Irish Wish yesterday?
Oh God, no. I'm not watching that.
Day.
It's so bad. But I'm not getting back into Irish Wish again because Jamie's not here. It would annoy him the most if I was to do it. So I'll save it for 2 weeks' time. Ellie, have you got anything for us on what you've been watching?
Yeah, it's funny you bring up like the different ways in which you like bad films, because I saw a film that I thought was quite bad, but in the way that I just like, which is that there's actually like a lot of creative merits, and it's like a really interesting film with loads of really interesting creators in it. I'm a bit late to the game, but I saw Good Time by the Safdie brothers with Robert Pattinson.
Wait, is this a bad film?
Well, it was a film that has so many good things going for it that I walked away from quite unsettled with it, really. Because again, we've covered lots of stuff by like Sean Price Williams on the podcast, and it's like, I think his cinematography is great, and I think that the film looks and just feels great, and it's so compelling at like every turn. I just think that like I came away from it kind of like, I don't know. I think that it is essentially just 2 hours of a guy prolonging the necessary care from his intellectually disabled brother, and the film moves with enough of an acknowledgement of that, and in that it's kind of where we start and finish the film. But obviously, like, the kind of crazy night of crime that we see is the real meat of it. And I just sort of felt it's incredibly cynical in that way, but it has kind of like a slightly misplaced perspective. Like, by the end of it, you're really, really hating Robert Pattinson because he's genius and very charming, but at the same time, he does such sort of creepy, unscrupulous things to kind of get what he wants, and what he wants isn't necessarily anything noble. So it's just kind of like a tough watch for me. But again, like, I think it's directed brilliantly, and I think it's performed brilliantly, it's shot brilliantly. So I was having a great time, but I kind of walked away from it with it just like niggling in my head of like, what didn't I like about this? What was kind of bugging me about this? So it gave me lots of time to kind of sit with and think about, which is the kind of bad film that I like. But I do also like bad films that are just bad and you know they're bad immediately.
Okay, I have 2 questions. Did you like Uncut Gems?
Okay, I've not seen Uncut Gems.
Okay.
That's next on my list.
Okay, I would be curious because I wonder if part of it is just they are such uncomfortable. I've not seen Good Time, but I've seen Uncut Gems.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say I enjoyed it, but I really wonder, did anyone enjoy that film?
Yeah. That's the thing as well, like, because, you know, it is cynical, and I think that's fine. It's fine to have a film that's kind of about how, what we're really discussing is how the kind of state of the world. Like, when we go around in Good Time, we see, you know, like, the judicial system not working and people's domestic lives falling apart, and everyone is a little bit more desperate, and that's where this kind of real sinister story comes from. But at the same time, like, I don't think that pairs well with the really quite like lavish, quite indulgent cinematography of the film. It feels like it's quite valorizing of it in a way. Just because, like, you know, there are many reasons why it works really, really well. And I think that it also kind of kickstarted, it was 2017, so I do think it was like part of kickstarting this whole like neon light vaporwave aesthetic that a lot of like big A24 films have. But then, yeah, when you kind of like look at the plot in its totality, what the film has been this really like harrowing, cynical journey, but just how cool it looks. Like, wasn't it cool though? And I was sort of like, it was cool, but I feel like it's not cool when I think about it, which makes me think it's not really cool, you know? So I don't know, just a really interesting one. Like, I really like I like the work of the Safdie brothers. I like the work of Sean Price Williams. Really like Robert Pattinson. He's so good in it. But it was just that thing where I was sort of like, this is bugging me. And it's like, it makes you kind of like wonder why. And it sits with you for a while.
I really liked Uncut Gems. But then I'm a bit of a psycho. So.
But did you like enjoy it?
Oh yeah.
Okay, that's good.
I love to be on that roller coaster. I don't think I ever want to get off. The only thing I can really add to this discussion is I rewatched Finding Nemo, and I'll just read out what I wrote on Letterboxd.
I do love this review.
Which is that I know that this take goes somewhat against the message of the movie, but that little girl is evil, and I'm glad she got attacked by that pelican. Fuck this kid. Okay, shall we talk about Mickey 17?
Yeah, speaking of Robert Pattinson.
Yes, we are speaking of Robert Pattinson. That's an excellent segue. Delightful. It's good to see that all of our hard work is paying off.
I've been trained.
I've been here for long enough to know exactly the kind of thing this guy would do. So, Bong Joon-Ho's back, everybody. Everyone get excited. Robert Pattinson is Mickey. He's this down-on-his-luck guy who joins a mission to colonize space, and his role is an expendable, not from the bad, good, like action franchise of the same name, starring Sylvester Stallone and other people of this nature. He is kind of, when they're on this space mission, he is sent off to do some of the most dangerous jobs, because his deal is when he dies, they just reprint him and bring him right back to life. Naomi Ackie plays his partner Nasha. Stephen Yeun is his pal Timo. Anna Maria Bartolome from Happening is in it. Thomas Turgus from This Is England is in it. Tim Key is in it for some reason.
That was crazy.
It's very unexpected.
Deliberately sought out. Did you read the
Yeah,
Wikipedia?
Bong Joon-Ho really wanted Tim Key.
Yeah.
And Tim Key was as confused as the rest of us. And Mark Ruffalo and Toni Collette are the sort of politician and partner duo who are kind of piloting this mission for the stars. Now, Annie, I want to come to you first. The Oxford English Dictionary defines satire as the use of humor, irony, exaggeration, or ridicule to expose and criticize people's stupidity or vices, particularly in the context of contemporary politics and other topical issues. Do you think there's a chance that Bong Joon-ho and Mark Ruffalo in particular simply ate this page of the dictionary and then decided to see how far the book parasites could pilot them in their journey to the stars?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I really respect about Bong Joon-ho is he doesn't do that thing that a lot of directors do, where they're like, I don't see my film as political. He is very, like, explicit about his politics. But he is doing, like, his version of that, which is, this film isn't about anyone in particular. And I'm like, well, then you should have told Mark Ruffalo that. Because Mark Ruffalo is doing a Trump impression. Like, that is what Mark Ruffalo is doing. 100%. And it's very difficult to, like, then divorce this from its current, like, political context. And it doesn't matter how many interviews Bong Joon-ho does and goes, like, we were drawing on so many, like, contemporary, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, but why does he sound like that, though? Why? That specific accent. So, I don't know. I found this a little bit... His stuff is always very on the nose. Like, he's not a very subtle filmmaker. I think politically this one is maybe the most on the nose of, like, a lot of stuff that he's done. But it also felt to me very recycled in terms of his other films. So I think there is a lot of Snowpiercer in this. I fucking love Snowpiercer. It's my favourite Bong Joon-ho. There's also a lot of Okja in this. I think there's also, like, shades of, like, Parasite and other things. And my main impression when I was watching this was I kind of feel he's already done it better, maybe, in those films. And that isn't to say that this is a bad film. Rob Pattinson is doing a great job. Mark Ruffalo is having a nice time. God bless. Like, between this and Poor Things, he is really... he's left Marvel behind. He's in his A game. He's having a great time. I really love that for him. But it did feel very... Yeah, like you say, like they ate the dictionary definition of satire and they puked it out. And what's there is kind of, like, really interesting, but also feels familiar, both, like, politically and cinematically, in a way that I found a bit like, oh, I don't know, okay.
Yeah, I tried not going in with, like, very high expectations just because I didn't want to oversell myself. I was like, it's not going to be Parasite. This isn't, like, a follow-up to Parasite. It's obviously, like, a very different type of film, facing different audiences. Unlike Parasite, which is very genre-less, this is very clearly signposted science fiction genre. But I still went in with sort of the expectations of it being like a standout sci-fi film, which I don't necessarily think that it was. I was mostly reminded of Starship Troopers and Moon by Duncan Jones when I was watching it. And I feel like, you know, it didn't necessarily need to be that way, because even when Bong Joon-Ho works within a genre, like if you think about Snowpiercer doesn't necessarily have any of the kind of like crazy tonal shifts or sudden switches that Parasite has, right? Where it becomes a different film halfway through. Like, you know, you can kind of work out how Snowpiercer is going to go when you're watching it, but at the same time it's still so compelling because this structure of like going through a train carriage in an action film allows you to just refresh the scene, and you can be in like a nightclub or a sauna or a classroom, and you can just kind of constantly keep it like, I don't know, moving and reinventing. But like this, I kind of clocked being like, oh yeah, you know, on a very like surface level it seems a lot like Starship Troopers, but that never really goes away. It never really becomes anything other than kind of what you take from it at the very beginning, I felt. And I kind of expected it to get like weirder and a little bit more incomprehensible, but really there is just like a lot of symbolism and plot threads that kind of just get dropped, or they don't fully satisfy. It's not to say that there's things that I didn't enjoy about the film. I think Robert Pattinson's great. I actually really liked Mark Ruffalo. I did recognize it as like a Trump impression, but again, he seemed to be just like, I don't know, doing a pretty good job. But yeah, like, I think that when you're saying, oh, this is a Bong Joon-Ho film about kind of identity and like the kind of multiplicity of identity and in a way like exploitation of workers and kind of confronting something that's like very, very universal, which is life and death, it's a surprise how tethered it is to just the contemporary moment. Like, the idea that this is meant to be 30 years in the future is quite like, I don't know, it's almost like poor sci-fi writing for me. Because like, hey, it's not just going to be like 2025 in 30 years. Like, it's not like it was 30 years ago now. And in like 1 year, we've experienced like a lot of like shifts that people like don't necessarily, I don't know, like people feel like they can't keep a hold of, and that's so much more than what happened in the last 5 years, and that's so much more than what happened in the last 10 years. So there's just not a lot of imagination going on as to where like the future is going, other than just like, yeah, I think that it has quite a limited scope because it's so desperately trying to kind of imitate things that you see in media today. Not to say that that's like imperfect. I think there's lots going on that's cool about it. Like I quite like the kind of quite like junky science fiction of it. The fact that when he gets printed in this kind of miraculous MRI machine, like he gets printed in and like halfway gets stuck and like gets sucked back
the little,
in
like,
and
jolt that
jolts out, and
it's such a good
like,
detail.
I don't know, like that reminds me of like science fiction in the 70s, like Alien and Star Wars, when everything just like all these kind of like miraculous machines just don't work. They're just like crap. And like that's a really charming, I think, kind of aesthetic that your kind of Interstellars have left behind. But the truth is, like, yeah, I don't know. I was trying to temper my expectations. I don't know if I went in just expecting too much, but I really kind of felt like there were ideas of a much kind of grander and a much, yeah, kind of like more universal science fiction story than what this really is, which is one of the way more heavy-handed Bong Joon-Ho's.
Yeah, and also I think a little bit politically confused in a way that something like Snowpiercer and Parasite have this very kind of coherent, not like message, but like, yeah, ethos and like politics behind them. Whereas with this, I don't know, I found Naomi Aki's character really bizarre as to how to kind of, what role she's playing. She's like self-described as like a cop at one point, and then makes this very like anti-colonial speech. And then at another point, something else happens with her that's kind of like, oh, so no, you actually are part of or you're not. And I think it didn't have a very good grasp of what it means to be, this kind of like radical politics that's outside of systems. And I found that quite, in a way that actually feels like a very sort of post-Trump, like quote unquote left politics, right? Which is like, as long as we're not like that, then it doesn't matter what we're like. And it's like, no, it still does matter. Like how you are behaving. It's not just like, not this guy. It's also what are your politics and how you think about like caring about other people and blah, blah, blah. And I just thought there was a kind of muddiness to how he dealt with that. Do you know what I mean? I don't know how to say it without spoiling it. But...
Yeah. I think one of the issues with the... So I think there's some really good things about the film. A lot of the performances are very good. A lot of the production design very good. Technically... really impressive. Like, you never get the sense that you're watching like someone pretend to be Robert Pattinson in the background while real Robert Pattinson is performing at you. Really like the kind of design of the aliens on the planet that they go to. Like, lots of the technical stuff was really, really good. And one of the chief problems that it has is that it's almost like, it felt to me like watching a film that was at one point 5 hours long, and that they had started cutting. And then that's why you get this thing that Ellie kind of alluded to of like, there's just bits that happen. Things happen and then don't get referenced again until the very end. Or there'll be like little sort of like what would be a side plot is actually just reduced to like 2 lines of dialogue. Or a character disappears off for a bit and then they just come back because they need to come back in order for the actual main plot to progress. But it doesn't make any sense for them to have gone for so long because you have no idea where they went. But I think that like the central... So I was thinking about this, and it's partly why I talked about satire, you see. I think it's really hard to do anything like satirical that is actually effective if you can't understand why the person you're satirizing would do the things that they're doing. And it almost feels a bit like there's a misunderstanding, a misapprehension of what the kind of like far-right fascistic figures in like modern American politics, what they actually are trying to do. And if you don't understand that, then you're not going to be able to take the Mickey 17 out of it very effectively. Because you have to, on some level, not quite empathize, but certainly like be able to put yourself in their shoes in order to work it out. And it's one of these things that like Starship Troopers is effective because it doesn't agree with any of the things that this society wants, but is able to tell the story of what the society wants and how the society operates in a way that lets you know, like, that points out the bizarreness of it and the kind of hypocrisy of it and the kind of the bad elements by presenting them from the perspective that they would be presented if they were good, if that makes sense. Whereas, yeah, like having Mark Ruffalo do a Donald Trump impression is basically doing that thing of saying like, this guy sounds silly. Silly man sounds silly. And then like you say, it's like, so it doesn't matter what we do because the silly man sounds silly. And that's where you get into these kind of like jumbles where like, okay, maybe this character doesn't actually make any sense, and if that character was saying and doing these things, then nobody would actually get on board with that. But it doesn't matter because they're not as silly as the silly man, who is silly.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't think this film did enough of a good job at grappling with the idea of what it means to effectively colonize space, right?
Yeah.
And it is very much that thing that the way that Mark Ruffalo's character does it is bad because he sounds ridiculous and he's like so flagrantly villainous. But it's not that like, therefore we shouldn't do it. And I'm like, maybe it is that you shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have that conversation at some point.
And he is flagrantly villainous, but in a way that never actually steps to what would be serious villainy. He's flagrantly villainous in a sense that like, yeah, he has bad... He sounds silly. Again, it's this thing of like, he does all this stuff and like, he takes Tim... So Tim Key's character is actually quite a good example because he takes Tim Key's character, who's this really desperate guy who is like obsessed with the cult of personality around this sort of like pseudo-political leader who ends up leading this space mission. And you would think that like, he would have some... If he was a real bad guy, like in the Billie Eilish song, Bad Guy, that he would treat this guy terribly. But actually, he just gives him quite a good job. And the only thing he makes him do is dress up as a pigeon. Like, and actually, you know what? It's one of these things where, like, if someone said to you, oh, you can be, like, the right-hand man to the fascistic overlord of the space mission, and all you have to do is wear a funny costume. It's like, well, he's wearing a suit, so it's fine. Like, I don't see what... It's one of these ones where, like, I think one of the things about Mickey 17 overall is that it has a lot of the surface level base stuff is really, really impressive, but it is one of those films where the more you start to pull at it, the less sense it makes.
Yeah.
So it's really good for if you just want, like, if you want to just go to the movies and watch a good movies, then it can work for that, because you're like, I recognize all these people and they're all doing good acting. And they're and oh, that's a lovely space alien monster, and oh, look at that production design on that staircase, that's delightful. But as soon as you start trying to be like, unfortunately, if you're anything like us and you start to be like, what are the themes of this film? I think the short answer is confused.
Yes. Yeah.
I think
in a jumble.
It's just unfortunate because it's kind of exposed to me that, like, a lot of the times Bong Joon-Ho, again, like you say, is like a satirist who can sometimes be heavy-handed, but largely I think has like a really good filmography. But there are times where I think that he's a little bit toothless, and that's fine. Like, if you think about, I think even Snowpiercer, again, is like one of his like grittiest films, right? But you don't see anything like that horrible in Snowpiercer other than just the conditions in which people live. You see the thing with the ice, but I feel like we cut away from that. You actually don't see the guy get his arm broken in Snowpiercer. I think you see it in the series, but not the film. And then, like, you know, with this, just what really kind of like jumped out at me is that this was supposed to be a film about a guy who has died 16 times, and yet it seems to have quite a reserved like feeling about mortality. Apparently Robert Pattinson studied for his performance Jim Carrey in Dumb and Dumber and Johnny Knoxville in Jackass, because these are characters who can take a punch in a way that make people laugh. But like Robert Pattinson barely gets punched in this film, really. Like, a lot of the kind of like montage of quite like slapsticky, slightly like dark humor deaths that we see aren't actually like viscerally or physically kind of like frightening. They're kind of just like him being locked in a thing that he can't breathe in, and then he just dies.
I think his stuff isn't frightening. I will say, like, one of the things that I was like, oh yeah, this is a very Bong Joon-Ho film, is that there are moments of violence amidst the comedy that are really like, like horrifying. And I think it was less with this character and more with the little creatures that I was really like, that'll kind of be trundling along and then something will happen in a kind of frame. Yeah. And the film actually doesn't linger on it in a way that people actually don't linger on violence. They do move on from it, and then you're left to kind of metabolize that by yourself. And I do think that that is quite good, but I agree that they don't really do a very good job of it with Robert Pattinson's character, which is the main thing. The thing I found quite interesting about how it thinks about death is that you do have this society in this spaceship that has so little regard for its people that it will print them off again and again and kill them. Like, that is a thing that they are willing to do. And then you have this other society that the death or harm of like one creature is like unacceptable. And it made me think actually a lot of this within the context of like a sort of post-Palestine, post like October 7th world, and like what that means and what the value of like a life and like statistical and how we think about this stuff in terms of statistics. It did make me think a lot about that. But again, it felt very muddy because we're meant to be laughing at parts of it. And I'm like, but I don't think this is funny, actually.
And it is also just, I don't know, I felt like sometimes, again, I loved the design of the creatures. I kind of loved the whole world that we built within them. But it did remind me of that, the kind of the blunter aspects of Okja that I didn't like, which is just that like, oh, look how cute and cuddly the alien is, and how like mean and horrible to the cute and cuddly alien the people are, and that's like this very just building block way of like setting up audience expectations for who's good and who's bad without necessarily interrogating it any further.
Well, a lot to dig into there, but is there a way that you could condense that down into just a number from 1 to 5? Yes, that's right. It's it's the letterboxed corner. Yeah. So, what do you think out of 5? If I really had to just say, take that quite interesting, nuanced conversation and explain it in the most basic way possible, you could say that's a thematic link to the film. Anyway,
I would say 3.5.
Yeah, Ellie,
I would say 3.
I think 3 as well, which is unfortunate when you say 3 after a big long conversation like that. You're like, it's in the middle.
Yeah, but it kind of is.
Some good, some bad.
Yeah. which is a shame. But also, I'm like, you know what? Go off, King. Make a mid-film.
Yeah.
Like, you've put in the work.
They're not all gonna be winners.
No, exactly. It's so fair.
Right, more dystopia. This time with Flow. Fun fact: the highest-grossing Latvian film of all time. Yes, that's right. We've done that already. So yeah, this is.
Like, what are we recording?
So this is the Oscar-winning animation from Gilts Zilbalodis. I wrote that down phonetically, and then it tripped me up trying to read it phonetically, so that's why it came out like that. So basically, in Flow, a cat runs away from a group of dogs as a huge flood approaches their kind of like outdoor, slightly bucolic scene. The cat ends up on the vast new open water on a boat with a capybara, a lemur, and a daft as a brush golden retriever. And they're all kind of working out where to go next and how they can all live together in harmony. So yeah, Oscar-winning film, beat My Boys, Wallace and Gromit. It's all right. I've come to accept that now.
Have you?
Yes.
Okay.
No,
We'll see.
I haven't.
We'll see. Yeah, we'll
Justice
see in
for,
the ratings.
Justice for Feathers McGraw. But Ellie, as I always say when we have these things, you're quite into animation, aren't
Quite
you?
into animation,
Yes,
yeah.
well, I'll come to you first then.
Sure.
What did you think of Flow?
I loved it. It's animated really well. It's a really like visually beautiful film. It's very visually beautiful in quite a sad way as well. Like even when you kind of get really wrapped up in the characters, I mean they're just animals, but they are characters. Even when you get really wrapped up in kind of like the slightly more, I don't know, like lighter or softer interactions they have, something can come along that is just really bleak and it kind of like holds just this quite mournful tone over the entirety of the film, but at the same time that, you know, it's just, you can't really take your eyes off it because it looks so good. It does look at points quite video gamey, and that to me, that's not a negative thing, that's a positive thing, because if you think about it, like kind of apocalyptic worlds have been visualized in video games more than any medium over the last 10-20 years. So like Fallout and The Last of Us, it's really cool to kind of see the artistic goals of video games kind of having an influence on Oscar-winning animated films. But like another thing that video games are good at is kind of having like silent protagonists. So you get the sense that they really did kind of like look at, well, I don't know, like, you know, Minecraft or something like that is a game that doesn't have characters who say things or do things, but you're just there, you just have to survive. So I wonder if they were kind of like looking there for influences on how to make a world that doesn't have any dialogue, a world that we just explore visually, and it really is just about kind of like, you know, because animals are stupid, they don't have plans or anything like that, they really are just using the resources to hand, and it is kind of like, I don't know, very watchable for that, for just having these short-term goals that we're constantly trying to solve. We're just trying to get away from this dog or from this flood or from this falcon or whatever it is.
It was oh wait, hang on. I looked this up. Saddlebird?
Oh.
Hang on, was it
Wow.
a saddlebird?
This guy birds.
Okay, no, it's not. No, okay, keep talking.
Okay.
And I'm going to find out what it was.
But yeah, so like...
Don't find it before me. Secretary bird.
A secretary bird.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, like it's just sort of animals acting to their nature. So even though this bird is coming in with these huge claws, and it's genuinely quite like a visceral, quite terrifying scene where, I don't know, like in your day-to-day life, you don't give a shit about being scooped up by a bird, but like here it just feels so like lethal. Like that's really, really impressive, but also you don't really hold it against anyone, or rather you can see that the kind of like the strength of the filmmaking is that it's just animals acting within their nature. The conflicts arrive because like a dog and a cat on a raft will inevitably like clash in their behaviors. I say that you're able to separate it. I did find myself by the end of the film being like, this fucking lemur, like, and you're like rooting for the capybara, but you hate that fucking lemur. So like you can like build an attachment. There is like lots of characterization and conflict going on and being resolved.
I do think it's an incredible testament to how much characterization you can build just through the kind of physiology of a character and through their limited actions. You don't need spoken dialogue or written dialogue to, you know, tell what a character's about and to be able to sense an affinity with a character, which is to say, tag yourself, I'm Capybara. But Anahit, what did you think? Which of these animals are you?
Which of
Are
the
you
animals?
joining us on Team Capybara?
Yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah,
Fuck it.
Legend.
Yeah, I thought it was sweet. I thought it was nice that a film that isn't attached to a big studio such as DreamWorks or Pixar would win the like animation Oscar. I think that's kind of cool. Big up Latvia, I guess.
Shout out to my boys in Latvia.
Shout out to Latvia. I know nothing about Latvia. But I'm sure they're lovely and I'm sure it's very great. I thought the whole time watching this, do you guys remember that Windows screensaver with the bricks and the maze and you would like go through the whole time? That's what I thought the whole time. Because there's like a kind of, not even graininess, but like I don't know what the word is, but like a real simplification to the character design. And then you can almost see like the different planes of the bodies and the kind of buildings and the water that is quite like we've just got to 3D animation. Do you know what I mean? Like we discovered it not that long ago.
Well, I would say, to go back to video game metaphors, I think they kind of min-maxed. They put all of their points into water effects. And we're like, far is too difficult.
Like
it took Pixar like all of Steve Jobs' money and several decades to work out how to do effective fur textures. Like, let's just spend all the money on water.
And the rest of it, like, he could just have his little eyes and that's okay. So yeah, there's like a kind of definite way in which it's animated, but then also the camera like moves, like it's kind of constantly discovering its surroundings in a way that I think is very similar either to a video game or indeed to a Windows screensaver. So that was what it made me think of a lot. Brackets, not derogatory. I thought it was kind of sick. I don't know if it's really my kind of film. I do like words. They do say
bold
that
there from the 2-time published author.
Yeah, coming from our books editor.
Anna Heat's coming out strong in favour of words.
I do love a word. That is the thing about me.
No one saw coming.
I did watch this guy's, I don't know if it was his first film, but his previous film, Away. It's very, very similar. I think features a motorcycle on water, from what I remember. And me and my friend Christina went to watch it at The View in like the month between lockdowns when the cinemas were open. And so I also don't know if I have a slight PTSD response to this guy's work, that I'm like, ooh, I feel weirdly unsettled. You know? I found it quite unsettling and I can't really tell where that came from. But I think it's very beautiful. I think if you could watch it in a cinema on a big screen, especially given that there isn't any dialogue, and not what I did, which was crocheting the whole time, you would probably be like a lot more, I think it could feel like quite a like spiritual, like moving experience, as opposed to me being like, wait, what is the cat doing now? But very beautiful and very, I don't know. Yeah, a weird one. I can't tell if it's just, I don't think there's anything wrong with the film. I think I just didn't like attach to it. Yeah,
I think it's quite, it's genuinely quite like an esoteric, like strange film, because it's all just in camera, shot selection, light characterization, like no dialogue, no written at all. You then are just like, it clearly is like an allegory for climate breakdown. It's also an allegory for like community and all these kind of things. But then it is also just a golden retriever and a lemur having a fight over a mirror on a boat. So it does have that, I could see why it feels like one of those classic your mileage may vary films. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it looked amazing. It was like genuinely surprising. I think that it had a lot of like tricks up its sleeve, and actually just like told a story really, really effectively. It took you on this journey from where you start to where you finish. I'm not going to spoil it by saying where those places are. But it also did show that the real ship, the most important ship, is a friend ship, and it's the friend ship that you made along the way.
That's so true.
That's right. That's one of the ways in which we're operating in this film. Hey, when you're not allowed to write anything down, you've got to keep it fairly straightforward sometimes. But yes, Flo, I think also, as much as they did do my boys wrong, Wallace and Gromit, they'll always be my Oscar winners. But I do appreciate that, like, something like this, which is genuinely doing something interesting and artistic on a small budget in animation, is worth celebrating and should be celebrated. It's just a shame.
They couldn't give two.
It's a shame that they couldn't give two animated Oscars.
It's true.
One
It's so
to
true.
this good film and one to my sweet boys. but it's all right. I'm over it, and I'm not annoyed. So that was Flo. Ellie, what did you think out of 5?
I would say 4, yeah.
4, that's good. I would also say 4. Anahit, what would you say?
I would say 3.5 again.
3.5. It's a solid week for Anahit. She's having a good time, but not a great time. Okay, and off the back of 2 different visions of a future that could be bad, could be good, could fall somewhere in the middle, we wanted to have a bit of a chat about dystopian visions of the future in cinema from across the history of cinema. But I say history, I mean, it's mostly going to be the last 25 years. Come on, let's be real. None of us want to be talking about Charlie Chaplin.
No. Metropolis, which I have not seen.
Excellent. Metropolis, a film which they tell me I should have seen. We'll just have a bit of a chat about kind of dystopian films. So we'll bring in some of the other ones that we were talking about earlier and some other things that we think are good and worthy of a conversation in the context of these 2 films we've just talked about. That's the premise of this segment of the podcast. I think it's going to go very well. So, Annie, I'll ask you a question first. Why is it that dystopias are so appealing to filmmakers and to audiences when, almost by definition, they would be very, very bad if they were to come to pass?
I mean, I think any sort of, broadly conceived horror, right? Which I think dystopia can sort of fall within that framework a little bit, is something which speaks to the anxieties of the time, like the kind of social and political anxieties. And it's a way of unpacking that without just screaming, I suppose, into the void, if those are our 2 options. So I guess, dystopias, especially kind of thinking through the 20th century and the big political upheavals of the 20th century, were a really useful tool for being we just set off a nuclear bomb, and now what kind of world could that create? I think they're very obviously future oriented and very kind of bound up in ideas of cause and effect and consequences. And I think that then gives you as a filmmaker, or really as any kind of writer or creator, this enormous creative scope to take the seed of something, the premise, or to kind of go back to the beginning of something and then to posit it outwards. I think I was talking a few podcasts ago, maybe on the end of year 1, about that film 2073 that came out, I think
is
in
this
December.
the Asif Kapadia
one, the documentary that's half documentary, half dystopian sci-fi. And what is really interesting about that is it's this dystopia that's set in the near future, I think in the year 2073. And then in order to see how we got here, it does documentary bits of our present time. So it's kind of looking at techno bros, essentially, things like Elon Musk, looking at climate catastrophes. So it's tracing the roots of it back. And I think, as a genre, dystopias are really interesting because they're kind of very bound up in ideas of time and the movement of time and looking forward to the future, but they're actually really about articulating either the present or the past in a way that I find quite interesting. I don't know. Does that answer your question? I can't tell why they do it. I suppose because it allows them to do all of those things.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I kind of wrote down as a potential idea for why you would do it is a bit of a blank slate.
Yeah.
It sort of allows you to create that sense that you have thought about, you're trying to extrapolate from what is happening now and say, well, what could happen in the future? I think it's also important to say that dystopia is in the eye of the beholder. A lot of sci-fi could be read both ways, and it could be a utopia for some. I'm sure that the example I've written down here is that I'm sure that some people look at Minority Report and think it would be good to get the bad guys off the streets quicker. I'm on board. We can keep Samantha Morton in that weird jelly and then we'll all be sorted. And I think things I don't know why I got into my head, Demolition Man with Sly Stallone and Wesley Snipes is a really good example of it presents this idea of a utopia where crime has basically been solved because they've got these cryogenic prisons, but actually it's just a fever dream for insane right-wing nutcases who are we've solved crime. It's the only way you can solve crime in a utopian future is by just brutalizing the people who you think might do crime, which I would say, in my mind, would be a dystopian future, but for another could be a utopian future. You see, it's very complicated. There's 2 sides to this coin.
Yeah, and it is interesting, right, that yeah, like whose perspective are we looking at? Because a lot of the time when we talk about dystopia, we act as if there is a kind of an objective reality to it. Like everyone thinks The Handmaid's Tale is bad. And it's like, well, but there are people that don't, right? And there's something, that kind of contradiction in dystopia that is really interesting. And I think allows for it to like be a political genre, but actually also allows for it to be quite an apolitical genre at times, I think. Because it takes things like The Handmaid's Tale, for example, where it's like, wouldn't it just be kind of bad if this happened? And doesn't really interrogate, well, what about the people that don't think it's bad? And what about the people that it's already like happening to? And what about, you know, like these quite like black and white ideas of like morality rather than, I guess, how like power functions, I suppose.
I think this is where like you can get dystopias that really aren't effective. I'm thinking a lot about like Black Mirror as a series has so many different visions of the future and they're all quite dystopian, but like in some of them it's like, oh, you know, in this future, absolutely everybody has to live in a tiny cube and exercise to generate power. And then if you're also forced to watch advertisements, wouldn't that be bad? And it's like, yeah, like there's actually nothing compelling about it at all.
And also imagine that reality.
Yeah.
Imagine having like live in a small house and watch endless advertisements. Couldn't be me, I'm afraid. I'm built different.
But it's also really interesting because I feel like, I don't know. So the dystopia that I'm thinking of right now is a series that I'm watching. It's the big series right now. It's Severance, which is quite dystopian, but it's not strictly set in the future. And this just got me really thinking about the fact that, like, yeah, as reality just becomes, as you say, like just harsher for everyone, and it becomes a lot less, I think that it becomes a lot less elegant in writing to imagine a dark, oppressive future, because reality is starting to take that shape. It'll be really interesting to see the ways in which the dystopia genre kind of like shift to accommodate that. So Severance, for those who don't know, it's like this corporate dystopia where the premise is that your brain is like, you go through a process where your brain is separated between your work sona and your life sona, and you lose all your memories of your personal life when you go to work, and when you come back from work you regain all of them and you forget everything about work. So you don't know what's happened to you in the day, you don't know what they've made you do. But on the flip side, your work persona doesn't know anything about themselves outside of work and is just expected to slave away with no vision of sunlight or anything like that.
Yeah, and they don't experience, that was the thing that struck me when I started watching it, where I was like, oh, to them it feels like they never leave.
Yeah,
which is the most horrifying
for
part.
them, I think the perspective of the first episode of the show is a character who just wakes up and is like, what's going on, where am I? And they're like, well, pretty much your outside self chose to get severed, so now you're going to be doing all the work forever. And you, as soon as you leave, you experience waking up the next day in work. So it's like very obviously dystopian, but it has this really electric aesthetic with, like, you know, this sort of subterranean complex of this labyrinth that goes on for miles of like of the kind of like liminal corporate space. It's all just cubicles and fluorescent lights. And then, but when you actually leave and you see the world outside, quite like interestingly, all of the cars are from the 1970s and the computers that everybody uses are all like bulky and chunky. And it reminded me a lot of Brazil, which is the Terry Gilliam film where it's set in somewhere in the 20th century. It's in 1985. It's a fictional version of Britain. It's this draconian, oppressive, like, bureaucracy, but all of the technology is invented. It comes from different places. Some of it's very World War II, some of it's very imagined. So I don't know, this is just a very interesting kind of like turn for dystopian fiction, I think, that it's like less about predicting the future and more just about representing the kind of liminality of the world that we live in now.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that reminds me of is, so one of the really interesting things about The Matrix as this kind of like idea of a kind of future hellscape is that actually one of the most interesting characters is your bald man whose name I've forgotten. Stryker, is that his name? Wee bald fellow with a tash.
Which guy?
Oh, like from the first one?
From the first one.
Is he? I don't want to spoil it, but
Is
yeah.
he-
Let's see. Bald fella, The Matrix. Not Lawrence Fishburne before anyone says anything. This is good audio, isn't it?
Cypher.
Everyone.
Cypher.
Googling,
Joe-
let's have a look.
Pantoliano.
Yes. So Cypher.
Oh,
That
yeah.
guy.
So
what
Cy-
else has he been in? Sorry, carry on.
So Cypher's character is so interesting because he kind of represents this thing that I was complaining that Mickey 17 didn't quite have, which is the idea that, like, in order for these visions of the future to be fully realized, you have to acknowledge that for some people, this bad vision, they will either accept it or they will internalize it or they will benefit from it. Kind of like you were alluding to with The Handmaid's Tale. It's like, this wouldn't happen if it didn't benefit some people and they weren't able to push it forward. And they have a conversation with Cypher where he talks about how he knows that the steak that he is eating in the Matrix is not a real steak, but he still is able to enjoy it. And he basically says that, like, I've been shown both sides of this coin. The one where we're kind of trapped in this kind of hell world where we don't have any actual agency and we're just being shown all these kind of things that are designed to kind of keep us ticking over. And I've been shown our true liberated selves. And actually, I can't deal with all the like the manual flush toilets and stuff of the liberated world. I'd rather just like go back to the other one, and I'm going to sabotage the mission to stop this in order to just get like a better deal for myself in the dystopia. I think that's like a really interesting element of a lot of the more kind of rounded out tales of dystopian future, is that you have to, it's like if you're telling any story, you do have to acknowledge that not all of the characters feel the same way. And that kind of brings it back to what we were saying about Mickey 17, that like you can't just, there isn't a unified feeling about what constitutes good or bad. So actually a tale of this kind of like future like fable nature does need to have some push and pull to it. It can't just be that everybody's on the same page, and that is what actually makes Starship Troopers, to come back to it for the second time in this episode of the podcast, what makes it so, what I just think really makes it work as a kind of dystopian satire is that pretty much everybody is on board with the project of the kind of sort of like quasi like Galactic Federation, whatever they're called. Everyone is on board, but it's presented in a way that lets you, the audience, be that other side, the one who's like, actually, no, this is all daft. Like, this isn't going to work. You've given up so much in order to do this, and you all seem really happy about it, but you're going to get that smirk wiped off your face in a couple of minutes when that giant spider monster eats your head. And I think that, yeah, I find that sometimes any kind of like sci-fi, but like kind of these visions of like, oh, wouldn't this bleak future be terrible? They sometimes can stumble on this thing that like, if it's just too one-sided and heavy-handed, it takes you out of believing it, I suppose.
I think the most interesting dystopias are the ones where it's really not that different to like the reality that we live in some way. Like I think the Hunger Games, the way that Suzanne Collins talked about having conceived it, which is that she was like flicking between, was it like 24-hour news and looking at like war kind of footage from like war reporting, and then reality TV. And it was like that intersection could exist at the same time within a society. Or obviously like The Handmaid's Tale was really based on like Iran after the 1970s. I think like Margaret Atwood has been quite explicit about that. The Matrix is like tapping into kind of developing like technology at the time and that kind of vision of like where it would lead. I've seen one episode of Black Mirror, which I don't think was very representative of Black Mirror, but some of the ones that like people like the one where it's like the social media likes and that gets you like more like footing in the world or whatever.
Yeah.
Like these things that are like, we basically already have this. And what if we just like tweak it ever so slightly and that becomes horrifying to you? And then you're forced to confront the ways that you're like, oh no, but this already exists. And I think those are the most effective ones, rather than like you say, like, oh my God, could you imagine if people behave like this, and not really thinking about, well, who are the people that are propping it up or whatever. I find those the most compelling, I think.
Yeah. And often like the ones that are the dystopian stories that are the most compelling and interesting and effective tend to be like ensemble stories where there are these like different ways that people are trying to combat this, or there's different like groupings that come together, because they don't really work in a kind of main character sense. The example that comes to mind, which completely disproves my entire theory, which I don't think quite counts as a dystopia but is probably a good one to bring up, is Doctor Strangelove, where literally every single person is played by Peter Sellers almost. And it's like that thing of like, that has the thing of like imagining what would happen, like you said right at the start about like, we've got this atomic bomb, what mad situations might we get ourselves into with that? But because Peter Sellers sort of plays like all the different sides of the negotiation, you can see how you would get yourself into a muddle really quickly. Because all these people are, I suppose, the argument of that film between like Peter Sellers and Stanley Kubrick and the various other people who are involved. The argument is that like these people are sort of all as daft as each other in their own way, and they will all just get into, because they're all just men trying to prove that they're smarter than the other men, even though they're all basically just each other with different sets of glasses on.
Yeah, 100%.
So maybe that's the exception that proves the rule. You either need like a big group of people who can present different visions on how to defeat a dystopian future, or you need Peter Sellers to play every single role in the film. With a few...
That's it.
Yeah.
That's the genre.
That is the plan. The dictionary definition of dystopia. It's like option 2, a film with Peter Sellers.
I do think it's really interesting that the word dystopia kind of came from, like, really that utopia existed before dystopia, right? Like, it was Thomas More's Utopia, and then we kind of thought of, like, well, what if there was a response to that? And the fact that that has become a much more distinct and rich and diverse genre, and a much more in-use genre than the utopian genre, of which we really have, like, Thomas More, maybe, like, one or two other, but we're not really interested in like thinking that through.
Yeah, is there a way that you, because like, I mean, you know, is there a way that you can introduce meaningful conflict in a film where the setting is supposed to be great for everyone?
Yeah, or like the ones that do that, I guess. Like I'm thinking of like H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, and like the film version of that, where he travels forward in time and he's like, oh my god, this is perfect, like everyone's so happy, everyone's so chill, and then it's like, oh no, there are ritual sacrifices to like the, what are they called, the Morlocks?
The Morlocks,
yeah. And it's like, oh, okay, this is what this society.
Yeah.
But then there was, I don't know, I've not actually read Thomas More.
But like, I guess it reveals something.
Was it good?
Like about the fact that like you can't really conceive of a utopia because the first thing that you're asking is like, oh, but there are people who don't fit into this.
Yeah.
There's no model of society where everybody is equally benefited and everyone is equally up for it. Like no matter what, there's dissidence. So it's like the question of, well, how that just contravenes with utopia. Like in a weird way, kind of like, I don't know, working through dystopia has really separated us from the kind of literary tradition of a utopia, you know?
And the other side of that is that if you have a utopian vision that someone is trying to enforce on other people, it then sort of by definition becomes a bit
yeah.
Whereas it's just much more, like you say, it's a much easier path to land on if you're like, I'm going to write a story about people being treated badly, but they overcome it so they can be treated better.
Yeah.
Rather than be like, I'm going to write a story in which everyone is treated well and the few people who don't like it can pretty much get it up there.
This is the thing, I think, like a dystopia lends itself to narrative, whereas a utopia is really a political manifesto.
Yeah.
And you can't really get beyond that. At least I don't think. I can't imagine, what it would be like to then have a film about that, where everyone's having the Care Bears. Is that utopia?
Yeah, like Barney the Dinosaur. It's children's children's television is basically what we're describing.
Yeah, true. Okay, so it does exist.
It does exist, and we can access it. Cool. Well, with that unexpected conclusion ringing in everyone's ears, I think we're almost exactly at time. So, thank you, Ellie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anahi.
Thank you.
Jamie will be back in 2 weeks' time, I assume. I don't think he's got the same thing on in 2 weeks that he does today. You can follow us on Letterboxd at The Cineskinny. You can get us on social media at The Cineskinny. You can email us at cineskinny@theskinny.co.uk. Cheers to EHFM for the studio. Cheers to you for listening. That's the end of the podcast.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. What a snappy ending.
That's ideal. My bus leaves in 5 minutes.
Lovely stuff. Just like we drew it up on the plan.